Now, I did want to talk about the neuroscience fact of the day on a love theme. So first up, let's talk about the reward circuit. So when you fall in love, your brain has an area called the ventral tegmental area, which is, the dopamine factory of the brain. This is the same area that lights up in response to cocaine or to any drugs, really. And that is the area that lights up when you're in love. So you aren't just like in love with them, you are biologically addicted to the rush that they give you. So there is this obsession loop that you feel when you get the high, and then you are constantly craving that hit, essentially, which is that person, that bond, whatever it is, which is why breakups can hurt so much, because you're literally going into drug withdrawal symptoms, and it takes time to rehabilitate back into society and kind of feel yourself again. So that's why there is this obsession loop when it comes to love and relationships. Hi guys, welcome back to the Shenanigans with Shreya podcast. I am really excited to be back in the podcast studio. It is the first episode this year. It's being recorded in the studio. We are back to our new semester at university, which is exciting. I really do feel like, a full clean reset, ready to start the new semester, fully rejuvenated. But yeah, I'm super excited. Now, it is Valentine's season when I'm recording this, and I have always been really curious about the neuroscience of love and also the art of yearning, because in recent years the term yearning has kept popping up. So happy Valentine's season, and whether you're in a relationship, you're in a talking stage, you're single, whatever it is, welcome back. Now, love and emotional connections are they are backed by biology. Really interesting facts come up when you do look up the neuroscience of love and yearning, and it's quite amusing that as we head further into 2026, there seems to be this massive cultural shift happening around yearning. For me personally, I think I heard about this term prominently last year when I was watching The Summer I Turned Pretty, and Conrad Fisher, shout out Conrad, he is the protagonist, and the internet was just like, oh my God, he's like the yearner. And there is this massive cultural shift happening, even with Wuthering Heights coming out recently, the movie. There's this tendency to kind of be exhausted by, swipe culture and instant gratification. And instead, yearning has replaced that, where it's this deep, persistent, almost painful longing for someone who's slightly out of reach. And that's having a major comeback. So yearning is defined not just by the intensity of the spark, that you feel with someone, but it's also the duration of the feeling. I feel like yearning does have this sense of a really long period of longing for someone. So today, we are going to break down why your brain enjoys the ache that yearning is, the psychology of our attachment styles, and how to manage these feelings, essentially, when they start to take over. Because I relate. If you've ever wondered why you can't stop, thinking about them or rereading texts that you've sent, I know all too well about rereading texts, because the first song that I ever released was called Reread Texts. Now, when you're starting to like someone, when you have that early attraction phase, your serotonin levels actually drop. And this drop in serotonin is quite similar and identical actually to what researchers see in people that have obsessive compulsive disorder or OCD, which is why that yearning or that longing for someone becomes quite intrusive, because your brain literally can't help but think of anything else, and then you keep going on these obsessive circular loops. And now, here's a really interesting one, that passionate love actually deactivates the prefrontal cortex. Now, mind you, the prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that's responsible for your ability to make decisions, your executive function, and your social judgment. So when your friends say, hey, they're a red flag, you might not be able to see it, but they're a red flag. And you're like, oh my God, no, he's just like that. You're making excuses. But it's usually because your brain has literally shut down the judgment center and you are biologically blinded by feelings you have for this person, which I think is really interesting. And I think something to note that if your friends or the people around you have something to say about the person that you're seeing, they are probably right, because you are not in a rational state of mind to be making correct judgments on someone, especially if it's a really passionate or intense feeling. So, is this constant longing, this constant yearning, actually good for us? Now, it is a double-edged sword. So on one hand, yearning is this beautiful flow state. It creates this sense of romantic anticipation. It gives life a bit of a cinematic vibe. But early attraction can also trigger a stress response. So your brain will release noradrenaline and cortisol, which are the fight or flight hormones, which is why your heart starts to race and you feel shaky, which is not the healthiest state to be in, but it does get healthy in the sense of long-term attachment. So once you kind of move past that yearning phase into commitment, your brain starts producing oxytocin and vasopressin. And oxytocin is essentially the cuddle hormone that lowers your blood pressure and reduces your fear. So essentially, love, or the feeling of love, starts as this high stress addiction and it ends as a biological anti-anxiety tool. But it is important to kind of be aware that attraction does mimic addiction. So when someone does go through heartbreak, especially if it's a really intense and dramatic breakup, your brain literally processes heartbreak the same way that it processes like a physical injury. The same areas of your brain light up on neuroimaging scans. So when you're going through these intense feelings, it is the equivalent of you literally like hitting your arm against something. Your brain can't tell the difference between a broken bone and a broken heart, which is really fascinating. So if you do find yourself in that obsessive loop where you keep checking their Instagram, you keep overthinking everything, it is good to be aware of that and biologically reset your brain. So the way to do that is to, first of all, disrupt that dopamine hit. There is a tendency that if you're in proximity to someone, or you're in the same space, you're in the same class, same friend group, whatever it is, that proximity fuels attraction more. So you do have to kind of reduce that exposure to reduce the dopamine hit that you're craving from this person or this emotion. Muting their stories on Instagram, probably a good move, guys. It isn't really petty, it's just a necessity to lower that reward response, that dopamine hit that you keep getting. The next step would be to re-engage your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that tends to go in a little shutdown mode. So if you write a list of their flaws or their red flags, and especially if it's someone that you don't really want to see romantically, but you can't help but see romantically, it does help a lot if you see these red flags or their flaws, or even just like how you're not compatible written down, because it kind of forces your logic center to process that this is reality, not fantasy. And also, we did talk about how there are lower serotonin levels in an early phase of attraction. So you do need to boost your serotonin naturally and kind of balance that out, because since that yearning ache is caused by low serotonin, you can combat that with exercise and sunlight. And also, just lean on your friends. Platonic love releases oxytocin as well, which acts as this natural buffer against the stress that might come with like romantic yearning or longing. So you can essentially use your friends to detox from your crush if that's necessary. Now, another interesting point or question that I came across was, why do some of us yearn harder than others? And it usually comes down to the attachment style that you have. So if you have a secure attachment style, you are quite comfortable with intimacy. You yearn for your partner, but you don't really panic if they don't, text you back immediately. But then there's the anxious, preoccupied style that, you might find yourself addicted to the dopamine spikes of a crush because you're seeking reassurance to quiet a fear of abandonment. And on the other end, we have the dismissive avoidant. So dismissive avoidants tend to suppress yearning altogether because needing someone is a threat to their independence and they can't be having that. I think it's good to be aware of your attachment style so that you can work around them and build healthier and more secure bonds. There's a really good book that I did read about this called Attached by Dr. Amir Levine and Rachel Heller. It's a really good book. It lets you figure out like what your attachment style could be, what kind of relationships or just bonds in general, even platonically, you could be in, and how to combat those feelings of anxiousness or avoidance and try to build it to a more secure mindset and more secure wavelength. Now, regardless of your attachment style, there is this thing called the law of similarity in psychology, where essentially you are naturally drawn to people who share the same space, share the same values as you, because it feels safer to your biology to do so. So for example, in a social interaction setting, people who sit together in a classroom or at work, they are more likely to form friendships just because they're physically close to each other, like proximity wise, which leads to this idea that you guys are similar in a social sense. And even if, for example, if you're at a party and you see a group of people that are standing close to each other, we tend to naturally assume that they're friends or that they're acquainted with each other. So that is the law of similarity, that, you will kind of have a tendency to be drawn to people in your proximity and who share the same value as you. I do want to end this by talking about best friends. Now, Valentine's Day, a lot of people tend to only think of, just for couples. But a deep platonic friendship triggers the exact same oxytocin release that a romantic partner does. And in fact, having, a solid group of people, a solid tribe, is a biological survival mechanism that literally helps your heart function better. There are so many studies on longevity of, the human life that say that, your social life is so important. Being surrounded by people and having social human connection is one of the key components of living a long and healthy life. So yearning isn't really just for a partner in a romantic sense. It can be that deep ache that you can feel when, miss your friends from home if you've moved away. And I know I feel that. So yearning isn't really a weakness. It's this proof of your capacity to connect to people. And it's a process because you are riding this dopamine high, you're building an oxytocin bond. Whether platonically or romantically, a bond doesn't work out, if you feel that kind of heartbreak sense, even in friendship breakups, that is equivalent to physical pain. So yeah, that's all we have on the neuroscience of love and the art of yearning. Thank you so much for listening. I had a really fun time looking into this topic just because it's so fascinating. And yeah, take care of yourselves. Have a lovely week ahead and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.